Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us today for Sutta study with Ayya Soma. So we'll be continuing our study of the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, and today we'll be looking at Samyutta Nikaya 5.4 with Vijayā. So if you'd like to follow along, you can find a link to the sutta in the live chat. And hello so far to Jens, Gita, and Michael. And hello to other friends who are watching, but not typing. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them into the live chat, and Ayya Soma will address them at the end of the talk. So I'll pass things over to Ayya for the sutta with Vijayā.
Thank you, Bante, and good morning to all our friends, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. So we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. All right, so as I like to do, we'll start by reading the sutta all in one breath and contemplate it by ourselves a little bit, and then start analyzing it. So the sutta begins at Savatthi. Then in the morning, the Bhikkhuni Vijayā, dressed, she sat down at the foot of a tree for the day's abiding. Then Māra, the evil one, desiring to arouse fear, trepidation, and terror in the Bhikkhuni Vijayā, desiring to make her fall away from concentration, approached her and addressed her in verse. You are so young and beautiful, and I too am a youth in my prime. Come, noble lady, let us rejoice with the music of a fivefold ensemble. Then it occurred to the Bhikkhuni Vijayā. Now who is this? This is Māra, the evil one, desiring to make me fall away from concentration. Then the Bhikkhuni Vijayā, having understood this is Māra, the evil one, replied to him in verses. Forms, sounds, tastes, odors, and delightful tactile objects. I offer them right back to you, for I, O Māra, do not need them. I am repelled and humiliated by this foul, putrid body, subject to breakup, fragile. I've uprooted sensual craving. As to those beings who fare amidst form, and to those who abide in the formless, and those peaceful attainments too, everywhere darkness has been destroyed. Then Māra, the evil one, realizing the Bhikkhuni Vijayā knows me, sad and disappointed, disappeared right there. Wonderful sutta, isn't it? Very short, pointy. Pointy is probably not the right word. To the point is what I wanted to say. So we see how this sutta starts with the same kind of stock phrases at the very beginning. So we see how the Bhikkhuni Vijayā, just like Bhikkhuni Soma, Bhikkhuni Chala, and so on, that we have been going through so far. She does the sort of usual thing that monastics do. So they go on alms rounds, get their food, and then find a peaceful place where to practice meditation. And all the bhikkhunis in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta seem to have a thing for the blind man's grove. So they all go there, and while in meditation, Māra, the tempter, comes and starts insinuating a lot of different thoughts and ideas in their minds. So we see how in Bhikkhuni Vijayā's mind, Māra starts presenting a few words, a few contemplations, such as, "You're so young and beautiful. And I too am a youth in my prime." So apparently, Māra appeared in the form of a good-looking man, I assume. Apparently, Bhikkhuni Vijayā, according to Māra, was into good-looking men. Who were young too, apparently. So he's like, "Well, you're young and beautiful. I'm young and beautiful. Match made in heaven. How about we go and have a date?" So I was like, "Come, noble lady, let us rejoice with the music of a fivefold ensemble." Ensemble? Is that how you say it?
Ensemble.
Ensemble. As I pronounce it in English. And it's such a cute little phrase, the naughty little Māra, because it's so human. Actually, that's what made me smile the first time I saw this. It's so kind of common. I mean, one of the reasons why, actually, the number one reason why monastics are known to disrobe, we were actually having this conversation here at the monastery, is really far from unique. It's always, not always, it's for the most part, like 99.9% of cases, it's due to the attraction to someone, not necessarily of the same, the opposite gender. It can be of the same gender, but it normally comes out of a sort of romantic infatuation, which for the beings involved seems like a very unique experience, something that only they are experiencing. And you don't even have to be a monastic, to actually understand it or have a feel for it. But you can look at your own experience, whether you're in robes or you're not in robes. If you think back at the relationship or relationships that you've had before the relationship became a thing, if you think back, what were the thoughts that were appearing in the mind? And usually it's always the same thing. It's just that the actors, so to speak, of the protagonists of the story have different features, different nationalities, different genders, different whatever you want, however you want them to be different. Sometimes it's the protagonist is Jennifer Aniston, sometimes it's Julia Roberts, but it's always a romantic comedy, right? Very similar screenplay. And it seems so unique. Now, this is the right time. These are the perfect conditions. This is wonderful. And especially when it comes to spiritual practitioners who are fairly young, there's this kind of pressure from the outside world of having to take advantage of those years that are still left where we're not full of wrinkles and decrepitude, and we still have all our teeth, or at least most of them. And actually, I'll share this politically incorrect thing that my mom, the comment that my mom made when I ordained. She was like, "You're still young. You're not ugly." Why don't you just, do what everybody else is doing? You still have time. Please do it. And I was like, "Well, Mom, I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in having a family with children. I'm not interested in that." But, if it comes to the sort of motive that is always the same. And I was like, it has nothing to do with whether or not, I am wrinkly or less wrinkly, or how old I am, or how young I am. It has to do with the path. So Māra, just like my mom, well, actually not like my mom, because my mom didn't manifest into a good looking being. She's good looking, but she's my mom. But I guess he went a notch further than my mother and manifested in the shape and form that was appealing to Venerable Vijayā. And also tempts her with music. So I assume that Venerable Vijayā, just like I did, and I still do, has, and the majority of humans actually, it's very powerful. The instrument of music is very powerful. So we all have a strongly gravitate to music. In fact, if you are a layperson, one of the biggest hindrances in meditation is having the songs appearing on repeat in the mind. And interestingly enough, that's one of the first things that disappears from the mind when one starts being on the 8 precepts. There's no recurring song in my mind. Yet, even as monastics, we can't escape music, especially if we don't live in the middle of nowhere. But perhaps we live in the suburbs, like here at Empty Cloud Monastery. But especially in Rockaway Beach, when we were in Rockaway Beach, our neighbors were so generous with their music. We would normally have 5 different types of music blasting on each corner of the block, so you couldn't really escape it. So you see how the mind responds to it, right? And sometimes there is longing for that delicious sensual pleasure. I personally, what personally happens to me every now and then, very rarely, is the desire to go to the opera, which I was really obsessed with. I know it's kind of weird, but but I used to be obsessed with the opera. I would go there by myself because nobody that was my age or younger was interested in going to the opera. So I would go and hang out with my 80-year-old friends at the Lincoln Center and listen to the opera. And it's very important to understand, the reason why I'm sharing it so frankly is because we need to understand that all of these temptations are very human. There is nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to be ashamed about. Māra is not playing any sort of sophisticated trick on us. And we're not special because our mind gravitates towards any of these sensual desires. It's the common experience of unenlightened beings. And to prove what I'm saying, to prove that it's not just my opinion, I'll quote the Buddha himself in a different sutta where he says, because before my enlightenment, while I was still a bodhisattva, not yet fully enlightened, the thought occurred to me, my mind often strayed towards those 5 chords of sensual pleasure that have already left their impression on the heart, but which have passed, ceased, and changed, or towards those that are present, or slightly towards those in the future. So fundamentally, going back to what we have experienced in the past and what we're currently experiencing, or what we could potentially experience in the future in terms of our sensual experience. Very human. So he talks about it. Yes, that's before I was an enlightened being, that's where my mind would gravitate towards. And this is the reflection then that he does, that he makes in order to counteract that. He says, then it occurred to me, being set on my own welfare, I should practice diligence, mindfulness, and guarding the mind in regard to those 5 chords of sensual pleasure that have already left their impression on the heart, which have passed, ceased, and changed. So he gives us a very practical way to deal with this. First of all, for the aspiration that is for all our welfare. In other parts of the suttas, of course, he says our own welfare and the welfare of others as well, which there is not much distinction actually. So practicing diligence, mindfulness, and guarding the mind. Both from the past, so also the reflection, understanding that they're impermanent, and they have ceased and changed in the meanwhile, but we have to acknowledge the fact that they have made an impression in the heart. The fact that the opera, I'm not currently listening to the opera, and I haven't gone to the opera in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, however long, 6 years now, something like that. But there is still the mark in the heart. So understanding it, looking at it, and practicing self-restraint, not indulging, not going on YouTube and putting Maria Callas on and and going, oh, well, what's this very innocent thing to do, just listening to that and marking again, putting a bigger mark on what has been sort of traces, but rather guarding the sense faculties. And we see how Bhikkhuni Vijayā, who is, on the other hand, enlightened, has already mastered this practice. So as soon as Māra starts tempting her, she understands straight away what she's dealing with. No different than all the other Bhikkhuni Arahats that we've been studying about. So understanding, once again, the hindrance as they appear, seeing them and removing the conditions and causes for the hindrance to be there to begin with. And so establishing mindfulness, fundamentally, that is what the Buddha was suggesting earlier in the passage that I shared with you. And this is also what he says in this other passage in Samyutta Nikaya 47.6. He recommends to his disciples to move in your own resort, in your own ancestral domain. Māra will not gain access to those who move in their own resort, in their own ancestral domain. And what is this ancestral domain? It is the 4 establishments of mindfulness. What for? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu dwells contemplating the body and the body, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure in regard to the world, contemplating feelings and feelings, mind and mind, phenomena and phenomena. This is a bhikkhu's resort, his own ancestral domain. So fundamentally, that's the function of mindfulness, of recollecting the teachings of the Buddha. You're collecting the Dhamma and understanding that we have control over our mind, that our cravings and our ideas and whatever it is are the temptations that Māra offers outside should not bother us. Like, we have the ability to restrain ourselves. And this is how Bhikkhuni Vijayā practices, as well as the other bhikkhunis. And that's why they're able to see Māra, to understand that Māra is in front of them. And in particular, in this sutta, she says, forms, sounds, tastes, odors, and delightful tactile objects, I offer them right back to you, for I, O Māra, do not need them. Thanks, but no thanks. She's like, well, all right, that concert sounds great. Yeah. Thanks, but no thanks. You can keep that. I really do not need them. And she keeps going. I'm repelled and humiliated by this foul, putrid body, subject to breakup, fragile. I've uprooted sensual craving. And you see how what comes to mind actually right now as Bhikkhuni Vijayā is sharing these words, these beautiful words. We can see how she explains how forms, sounds, and tastes and odors and delightful tactile objects. So the adjective delightful is indicative to the fact that there is a gratification. It's what the Buddha says, there is a gratification in sensual pleasure. If there weren't a gratification in sensual pleasure, we wouldn't indulge in it to begin with. And he also mentions that there's a danger in sensual pleasure, and that's what we normally overlook. And the danger is that it's impermanent, subject to change, subject to cease. It is suffering, and it doesn't belong to us. And of course, there is an escape. But in order to escape and let go and practice renunciation, one needs to understand the fact that, acknowledge that these sensual experiences are gratifying, that eating cookies is gratifying, or whatever we like. We just had breakfast here, so there is toast for this morning. Toast is quite nice, it's gratifying. But if we obsess with it, we're nourishing that hindrance. We're basically cultivating the sign of the beautiful, which the Buddha says that constantly paying attention to the sign of the beautiful, to the sign of the pleasant, to the sign of the pleasurable, is the nutriment for both what we are, both for the sensual pleasure that we are currently obsessing about, experiencing and craving, and also for future cravings. And the antidote that he recommends to this is doing the opposite. So if we see that our mind tends towards gravitates towards obsessing about sensual pleasure, obsessing about the beautiful, the mark of the beautiful, obsessing about whatever is pleasant in our experience, then we should counteract it by paying attention to the mark of the foul. So fundamentally what she is talking about when she says, I'm repelled and humiliated by this foul, putrid body. So she might be young and beautiful, and Māra might be young and beautiful too. But only if we pay attention to the mark of the beautiful. If we start paying attention, on the other hand, to the sign of the foulness, then we have a bit of a different experience of the body, right? We can see how it's subject to breakup and fragile, as she mentions. It's very easy to do this contemplation when we're sick. This past weekend I was sick. And the body was very uncomfortable, very unreliable. Lots of different mucus and nausea and different fluids. Not really comfortable, not really something that I wanted to be around with, right? And the reflection of how, as I'm aging, it's becoming more and more decrepit, very different than when I was in my 20s. And in the same way, we can see the other beings, we can look at the other beings that are around us, not to create this aversion towards them, not going like, Venerable Pamuto, like Venerable Soma, Venerable Sutta, something like that. Oh, you're all like so ugly. No, that's not the point. Disgusting, awful. No, that's not the point. The point is to understand things as they really are. So not to just look at Bhante Suma and go, oh, wow, what perfect, lovely features, what a face, and like chiseled abs and whatever muscles. And then having this fake, distorted version, distorted view of what actually Bhante Sumano is. But balancing it out with also paying attention to the less attractive things, qualities that he has in the body. He has, or she has, or they have, or we have. Actually, without or and, that we all have. It's a shared experience. There's not one body that is better than the other. We all have these characteristics. We all have foul, putrid bodies. And they're all also beautiful. So having a balanced understanding of this, which creates then the conditions to uproot sensual craving. Because once we understand something, it has no power over us. And we see how, in fact, Bhikkhuni Vijayā says, as to those beings who fare amidst form, and those who abide in the formless, and those peaceful attainments too, everywhere darkness has been destroyed. So fundamentally, when someone has done the job, has done everything that needed to be done, and whether one is dwelling in the jhanas, or whether one is dwelling in the formless attainments, the darkness, after the work has been done, after awakening, enlightenment has been done, darkness has no reason to exist. It's kind of embedded in the word enlightenment to begin with, the word light. And I'll end with another quote of the Buddha, who in Samyutta Nikaya 46.54 says, Brahman, when one dwells with the mind obsessed with sensual lust, overwhelmed by sensual lust, and one does not understand as it really is the escape from arisen sensual lust, on that occasion one neither knows nor sees as it really is one's own good, or the good of others, or the good of both. Then even those hymns that have been recited over a long period do not recur in the mind, let alone those that have not been recited. And the reason why I'm sharing this last quote with you is because I really feel it, in a nutshell, it explains what the problem is with something that a lot of times we feel is harmless, like obsessing with food, or obsessing with video games, or obsessing with music or obsessing with any type of sensual pleasure. There is the underlying idea when we start practicing that all of these things are pretty harmless, that we're not really harming anyone. Perhaps we might get a little bit fat if we're indulging in food, might get a few pimples here and there if we're particularly craving sweets or butter or whatever it is that we like to indulge in, or perhaps music. Like what's the big deal? I'm actually relaxing myself right now. It doesn't seem like, we're not going hunting and killing sentient beings or going out and shouting at people, which have kind of sort of clear, unwholesome vibe to it. But the Buddha tells us how this indulging in sensual pleasures is fundamentally what creates the conditions for us not to see clearly. Creates the conditions for ignorance, because we're not fully understanding our experience. We're not understanding the process of desire, the process of craving. So fundamentally dwelling in sensual pleasure, as well as actually sloth and torpor, like all the hindrances, ill will, anger, restlessness, remorse, all of that, actually, all the domains of Māra are the causes and the conditions for the lack of knowledge and vision. And it impedes us, it creates an impediment for us to recollect the Dhamma. In other words, to practice mindfulness. So practicing mindfulness prevents us from indulging in sensual pleasure, and in restraining from indulging in sensual pleasure creates the conditions for us to be mindful and to recollect the Dhamma. So I really love those words of the Buddha when he says, even those hymns that have been recited over a long period do not recur to the mind, let alone those that have not been recited. So sometimes on the flip side, if we actually have nourished the soil, created the right conditions for us to recollect the Dhamma, so recollect the words of the Buddha that we have in fact heard, we also have the conditions to understand what we have not heard. Sometimes the Buddha says that if we only master one of his teachings, we actually can master all of the others. The Dharma gates are endless, as they like to say in the Mahayana tradition. That is my understanding of it. They are endless, they are countless. And we can master each one of them without necessarily learning intellectually each one of them. And once we've done this job, the job has been done, we have dispelled darkness, and then Māra, the evil one, will realize Bhikkhuni Soma here knows me. Bhikkhu Samyutta here knows me. Bhikkhu Samyutta here knows me. Ayya Soma knows me. Antuarat knows me. And sad and disappointed disappears right there. Freedom from suffering. Freedom from the temptations of Māra. Unconditional happiness attained. All right, may we all attain blissful Nibbana.
So thank you for sharing, Ayya Soma. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And if anyone has questions, feel free to type them into the live chat and I will address them. So welcome as well to Robin, Miguel, Gita, and Yana. And I think I said Michael already. But Michael has a comment. He says, the sutta made me think about the absurdity of not permitting monks to ordain based on a technicality, as we find often in the Theravada Buddhist world. Any further developments on that lately? I'm not sure which technicality he's referring to.
Which technicality are you talking about? If you can give us more information, then we can address it.
And then lots of thank yous from Gita and Yona. Robin also asked which sutta was not the very, well, she said last quote, but I forget which one.
Oh, which one it was?
Maybe the last one from
the last one that I mentioned is Samyutta Nikaya 46.54.
46.54?
Yeah, if you send us an email, I can send you actually, since I have them right here, all the quotes with all the...
Oh, Michael says he meant nuns?
Oh, there's... so in the Vinaya, so female monastics have been ordained by the Buddha. So there is no problem for bhikkhunis, for female monks to ordain. I'm the proof.
Ancient tradition.
Yeah, it is in fact an ancient tradition, 2,500 years old, as well as several eons, actually countless. Without discoverable beginning, female monastics have been ordained, as well as male monastics.